The Bantu expansion is one of the most craziest times in history, starting at about 3000 BC and then ending at about 1500 CE or AD. Well, it really never ends. But the problem with this time and detail is that it speaks of very large amounts of people traveling or very productive birth rate because by very early times you see millions of Bantu people far away from where they started, which is in West Africa, in Nigeria, and bordering states, bordering areas. And so they travel to the east coast of Africa. But if you notice, there's a book written by Islamic scholars during the Islamic Golden Age, which says that the Zanj, which refers to the East Africans, far outnumber the Abyssinians. But the Abyssinians have been in the Horn of Africa or East Africa forever. They've never left that area. And so, why is it that these Bantu people, who are newcomers to East Africa, why is it that they far outnumber these people? And secondly, why is it that they've already covered so much ground in technology? Because their movement is claimed to have been the start of agriculture. So, because of the start of agriculture in their region and the start of iron smelting and all this other stuff, supposedly, this is the reason why the expansion happened. But by the time they get to East Africa, they have so many different styles of smelting. First of all, they have different metals, not just one. In other parts of the world, you had one or two at a time in terms of huge revolution. But in Africa, you see copper and iron and all these other things, including higher mixes like tin being utilized in this way. Gold is mined so frequently that it is considered a general metal rather than a luxury item like the Arabs and the Europeans considered it. It's strange because the entire region of Bantu just invented every invention that they lacked within the last, from 2000 BC and independently. It is now thought 100% that the Bantus did this independently of any people inside or outside of Africa. And they covered the entire history. So from 2000 BC to the 15th century, they covered what some people took 10,000 years to build, even building stone buildings, building all this other stuff. How crazy is that? Coincidentally, the Bantu expansion started at about the same time that Mentu, Hotep II, would have been a ruler of Egypt. Now, here's the funny part about this expansion is that it started at this time, but by the time the ancient Egyptians collapsed, the Bantu people were at the height of their civilization, inventing things that the ancient Egyptians had never even thought about at all. The portrayals from foreigners are even stranger. But what's even stranger is that the Bantu people run into populations very quickly from around the world. So while in Egypt they pretty much did not traverse the world, the Bantu people went as far as Japan in just under 3,000 years. So from the beginning of the expansion in 2000 BC, they start in the West Africa. By somewhere in 200 or 300 AD, They reach Madagascar and they run into the Melanesians. Then somewhere in the early days, they run into the Abyssinians somewhere in BC, somewhere BC, like 500 or 400 BC. They run into the Abyssinians. They also run into the Sudanese. And then later, somewhere in 700, 600 AD, they run into the Arabs. So that would be about 2,600 years. They run into the Arabs. And then in the 16th century, they become host, or they help the Portuguese sail to India, showing their maritime skills, showing that they were not just some population that was playing around in the coast. They actually assisted the Portuguese get to India by telling them, like, hey, you don't want to travel when the winds are going this direction. You want to travel when the wind is going this direction, which, by the way, if you travel in the wrong wind, it could take you 3 years to travel to India by boat using sails. Whereas if you travel at the right time, it could take you a couple of months, which is what they helped with in order for them to avoid running into the hands of the Arabs. And by the 16th century, they're in Japan. And the Americas. Some of these people discovered rubber and cloth and all kinds of technical things that you cannot even speak about in one sentence. You'd have to like do dedicated videos. But others wore leather skins as they had back in pre Bantu expansion days, which speaks of the diversity of this expansion, in that in some areas it's way more sophisticated than in others, which again lends this craziness of within 3,000 years, these people have such differing cultures, but they have an underlying culture.